What's up, guys? Topic for today. I didn't really come with any super big plans. I think one of the big things we can talk about is right now some of the reading I'm doing, and I'm posting this book on Patreon, is how the cardiovascular system is affected by strength training. And so if you're thinking that weights do not affect cardio, it's probably a bad mental state that you're in for your training. So there are changes in the body with respect to cardiovascular system and training. What's going on, Ryan? So do not neglect that the cardiovascular system is affected by strength training. More importantly, and again, there's not studies on this yet, but I think doing the type of warm-up that I recommend, the 4 sets of 25 with 3 exercises and getting it done with very little rest periods, is very important for general physical preparedness or work capacity. Work capacity becomes the limiting factor, and it became the limiting factor for me in my powerlifting days competing. The first raw powerlifting meet I do in 2013, I hit the 3rd highest total of all time. Showing up at a meet that I didn't know it was a walkout meet and had to walk it out. So I'd been training on a monolift for the last 10 years at that time, maybe 9 years, and show up at a meet and I got to walk the squat out. Luckily, I had a vast IPF USAPL background, so although I think it affected my squat maybe a little bit, it was still a right under an 800-pound squat on my first raw meet, with the world record being 826. So what I found was, as I went home and started dissecting my training, is that I felt like my work capacity needed help. So devising back from a talk that I listened to a PhD student present on in Australia in 2012, the year prior, they were talking about pre-fatigue and muscle strength and getting stronger and increasing work capacity. I'm like, well, I don't really do anything like that. So I went back and devised a plan, executed the plan with the bench only, and my bench shot back up again. So then I implemented it with squats, and then the next contest that I did, I broke the all-time world record in the squat raw, and then increased my bench press. So that's when I realized that work capacity was a huge factor in training that I was missing. But I wouldn't have not figured that out unless I was at a world-class level and really pushing myself, and then also focusing all of my energy into training. And this is where everybody, I think, in the modern fitness world really screws up, is if you want to be an expert in your field, my hat's off to you. You know, I think that it's going to be a more difficult road than what you think it is, because we have 2 separate sides of people. If you really look at the fitness game, we got doers and we got readers. Well, we got 3, and we got bullshitters. Doers tend to be genetic outliers, right? So if we were to talk to, and I'm just making assumptions, but if we were to talk to, say, Colton Edelbright, which is right now the best powerlifter on the planet, and you look at his training, he may or may not be able to help anyone else get better. He may just be a genetic outlier, and his training methodologies, although works for him, may not be suitable for other people. Then we have studiers or educated people. These people are PhDs, doctorates of various types, and they do a lot of studying, but they're not really engulfed in the trenches of the physical activity itself. They base their knowledge on science papers, which we know, although good, and it's awesome that we have people studying things, they tend to be doing it on novice people where they're going to get better at doing anything. So the studies can be a little bit harder to utilize in your own personal training, right? What's going on? Oh man, that's awesome. You're listening from Italy. That's great. What's going on, Daniel? I'll see you here in a little bit. let me stay on my topic, and I'll answer your question real quick, Ryan. Fake natty? No, I'm not fake natty. I was natural until 2004, and then I switched over to pro ranks and started assisting my testosterone under the supervision of a physician. But that's a different topic. So right now, what I want to get at is there are very few people that have both the in-trench experience and the education. And that's what we should be looking for in the field. Is this person highly educated, and is this person really put his own testicles on the table for 3 decades and busted his ass? There are guys that I think are highly educated and very smart that don't get the credit they deserve, taking me out of the equation. Stan Efferding is one guy that I think everybody should listen to. We have disagreements on how we should train, but he is a very smart man with nutrition, probably one of the smartest guys I've seen. He has a higher education. He's ran multi-million-dollar businesses, and he literally puts out information for people pretty much for free that I think should be behind a paywall. But Stan has donated his entire life to being stronger, fitter, more developed, and he's studied how to do it. And if you listen to him, he talks exactly like a PhD would talk, and he references almost everything he talks about. But then you have other guys that maybe have high education but don't have as much experience, and so we have to watch those guys as well, because it's going to be a different aspect. So the dudes that are right in the middle, the guys that have pushed education, put their own money down to increase their knowledge, and then put their bodies in a position to enhance themselves, either strength-wise, bodybuilding-wise, whatever, to learn the trenches. It's rare, right? I think if we look at why I hold the Soviet literature in such high regard is because a lot of those guys were ex-great athletes, A.S. Medvedev, Verkhoshansky. These guys were medalists or national caliber lifters that ended up getting a PhD in areas and then studying it. So point being is those guys, to me, are unparalleled in what they learned and the population that they were allowed to experiment on, right? So imagine having 250 of elite level Olympic lifters that you can take and you can train under your roof under direct supervision of a 24-hour process, meaning, you know, the Russians understood that training was important, recovery was even more important, sleep, nutrition, and reducing stress were key predominant areas of that needed to have predominance in what you were trying to do. You know, I mean, you can't just say strength training is this or hypertrophy is that. It's a very large spectrum picture of how everything's working together. It's why it's so important that we have online coaching on the website, is because we ask a lot of these questions. What's your goals? What's your work schedule look like? How's your nutrition? A lot of very serious people come in and get bioprints, and then we base their training on their nutritional habits, their caloric needs, their supplementation needs by ATP Labs. What's up, dude? All of those factors. Were you going to come in and do some cardio?
Huh?
Where we at? We're outside running?
It's nice out.
Yeah, it's not bad. I hear you. Okay. I don't know who Steve Marigin is or Chuck Alrens. I don't know who those guys are. I don't know who Vigorous Steve is either. What's going on, Vash 3 Stampede? Yeah, I mean, you can be always down for information that's behind a paywall, but it's free. I think the hard part is that you got to look at people that use this as a profession and not a hobby, right? So, I think that in some way, cases and forms, I learned this from Charles Poliquin, that if you don't have any financial skin in the game, the absorption of the information may be less. The trick is that for most people, when they buy something, they value it, and when they value it, they do it. So a lot of times when I put a lot of my stuff behind paywalls, it's because I want people to actually use the information, not just go, oh, this is cool, it's free, so I'm not going to dick with it, right? I don't think it's hard to squat over 530 naturally. I squatted 826 drug-free, and that was in a single ply way back in the day before the gear was out of hand, but that was in USAPL drug tested meet. So I think it's possible. Shane Hammond and Mark Henry and some of those guys squatted 900, 1,000 pounds with no drugs, because you're going to have those outliers. But it just depends on what your genetics are, and more importantly, what your leverages are, and probably most importantly, what your timeline is. I think almost everyone can squat 500 given the right amount of time and the right start date chronologically, meaning, if you're starting at 50 years old, it's going to be more difficult to get up to a 500-pound squat than it is if you start at, say, 13, 14 when you got your natural hormones on the line, right? The volume on the beginning strength and the template program, I don't know which one you're talking about, if it's the manual or what, but we try to, usually most of the manuals that we do, or even some of the apps that we have, are been battle tested with a lot of people that are beginners. So if I do a beginner manual, it's because I have experimented with that volume parameter with beginners for an extended period of time before I write the manual. And that's what I like about the stuff that we do at WenningStrength.com is we utilize a lot of experiments in the facility with beginners or intermediate or advanced people, and we see how it applies and we make adjustments before we make products. What's going on, MJ? I'm on the treadmill too, doing zone 2 cardio. Cool, man. Yeah, I try to keep my heart rate around 125 to 135. I just do it by incline. So right now I'm at like 6.5% at 2.7. That puts me at about 130. And I can maintain that and talk. And I can do it for 40, 45 minutes. But I usually use my cardiovascular training, like right now, just for overall steps in and to recover from the bouts of training. 70, person reach an incline 500. Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize that. Yeah, I like to read a lot of stuff about the older guys. Bill Sino. No, I didn't know Bill Sino, not that I can remember. So initially we had a question on decline bench. Is it good? Is it good? Yes and no. I find personally that the decline bench is harder to balance. So I am not stronger on declines than flat. Now some people can be. Usually I find weaker people are, just because they think that it shortens their range of motion, which in some cases it may. But I find that decline benching is really good to learn how to lock in your lats. And you really can't use any leg drive because your feet are tilted up. So what you find is elite level benchers have understood and learned how to use the bench press as a full body exercise. So if you're a very good leg drive bencher, then decline bench may be helpful because you can't use your leg drive and it's going to be more isolated to upper body. But I find that not necessarily one degree of movement, i.e. decline, flat, incline, are better than the other, and they need to have rotation in them. And a lot of that is due to the mileage that's placed on the shoulder, pec major, pec minor, and anterior delt. You have to kind of keep those areas fresh, so to speak, to where they can maintain consistent volume and intensities. The only way you can do that is by rotating the mode in which you're using to train. So if you train with a straight bar flat bench all the time, you're eventually going to create a shoulder problem, which is going to reduce your intensity, reduce your volume, and probably reduce your duration. And therefore, you're not going to get very much stronger, even though specifically you're training much more direct. You need to find an indirect way to get better, because the direct way is only the quickest way in the beginning. And then you run into this nasty thing called law of accommodation. And law of accommodation states that doing the same thing at the same rate for too long no longer creates a training effect. So what you have to be aware of is that training has to have variety in order to create growth. You can only train so hard, you can only train so long until it becomes overtraining. And once you start to overreach and burn out, the body will set regulatory factors. And those regulatory factors will shut you down from getting better. And most people are not cognitive enough in their training to understand that there's a way around that. So in reality, if you can follow some major set point rules that we follow at the gym and follow a lot in the manuals and online coaching and all this other shit, is your training session shouldn't last more than an hour. If you're training more than an hour, chances are your rest periods are too much, your fitness level's too low, and the amount of damage that is incurring is probably too high to sustain. Remember that strength training goals are created and done under extended periods of time. So when you see somebody selling a 30-day challenge or even a 60-day challenge, or you see people saying they'll increase your squat in 4 to 6 weeks, be careful. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but you need to be careful, because you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing sustainable? Because the person that sustains training for 5 years, obviously, is going to be in better shape than the person that goes balls to the wall for 10 weeks and then they quit because it's too much. It's all about dosage, right? Pull-ups can make you strong. We go through phases of pull-ups, and we go through lots of phases of rows. I think the trick is that there is not one better than the other. And it's kind of going on to my point, is you have to change the stimulus to the muscle tissue and the central nervous system in order to avoid law of accommodation. Dips, I'm not really a huge fan of dips. And I'll tell you why. About 10 or 15 years ago, closer to 15 years ago, my training partner was George Halbert. And for those of you that don't know George Halbert, he broke 12 or so world records in the bench press. George Halbert disintegrated his shoulder doing dips. And again, I think being at a world-class facility and level and seeing top-level guys get injured with certain exercises starts to give you an inclination that maybe those exercises are not long-term valuable to the joint. And what you find is that most people, when doing dips, they're going to be a little bit more anterior delt and pec activation than tricep. When it gets really difficult, they start rounding the shoulders forward. That it's just hard on your shoulder, pec muscles, and anterior delt. And so I find that for most people, dips tend to affect negatively the technique that's needed to bench press for, say, 2 decades to get as good as you can. No, I would not recommend flat benching every other day. Definitely not. First of all, you really don't need to stimulate the muscle more than every 72 hours. Second of all, law of accommodation is going to set in because you've already said you're going to do low volume. So that means what exactly? 3 sets of 10? I think that you need a little bit more intensity and drive in each training session in order to push both muscle mass and strength up. And I'm not a huge fan of using the exact same exercise all the time, just based on joint mileage. I would say for a normal guy that they're worse. Dips are worse. World class, I mean, George Halbert had some of the strongest triceps I've ever seen, and his anterior delt still got grenaded from it. And I have seen a lot of injuries come from dip movement. So I do not think that they're necessary or needed. And I'm pretty sure that most people that utilize dips tend to start having impingement issues in the shoulder. So I would try to stay away from it. What's going on, Scott Gotti? Push-ups on gymnastic rings are good. Yeah, we do them quite often. We use more TRX handles, but we've used gymnastic rings in the past. Really unstable, and I like that. And again, I think way better than dips, for example, and way easier to keep it in your triceps. But yeah, I think gymnastic rings are awesome. If you come onto one of the apps, you'll see it programmed in. Yeah, Master T, you probably had something off. Yeah, less gains for sure every 2 days. 4 days is a good split too. But if you read a lot of the Russian literature, they'll tell you 72 hours is the golden rule. So Master T, I would try to experiment a little bit with a 3-day wave instead of a 4 and see if that gets you even better. General approach to training for team sport athletes. Well, depends on what the team or the sport is. Team sports can be difficult because depending on what level they are, it depends on what background they have. And for most junior high and early mid-high school athletes for team sports, getting them stronger in particular areas is going to be a huge factor in not only their performance, but their longevity and their injury prevention. So depending on what level you're at, technical capacity is going to be your best friend. That means picking exercises that you can't really screw up, right? So in my personal opinion, if I had it to go back and say, you know, a big middle school was going to pay me whatever I wanted and I would train kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all they would do is belt squat. And the reason is because I got to teach them to push out and sit back. And it's going to take time because most people are quad dominant. So once they look perfect on a belt squat at say 1.5 to 1.75, maybe 2 times body weight, then I'll teach them the bar, and I will bet you their straight bar squat within the next 2 to 4 years will be far superior to a person that started with a straight bar. Because when you start with a compound movement like a straight bar squat, for a normal kid, it's going to take them quite a bit of time to master the technique. Whereas in the belt squat, we can master everything from the hips down. Then we can work on chest position. Then we can work on pushing out, sitting back. Then we can implement that into the straight bar after, say, 24 months. Their straight bar squat will soar. And we've seen this with elderly people at the gym. So going to purchase the training manual today. Love and appreciate what you're doing. Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Michael. Yeah, and if you like that manual, come check out Patreon or Train Heroic after you get done with the manual, and that will be helpful to keep extending what you're doing. What do you think about Frank Zane's leg blaster, like an SSB mix with a sissy squat? You know, honestly, I've never seen Frank Zane's leg blaster. I don't know. Yeah, the trick with the Snake Man, though, is in a biomechanical sense, are your quads the problem? And I find this being a huge issue. You know, a lot of people, when they stand and look in the mirror, that's what they focus on, is what they can see. But a lot of times, the muscles that you should be focusing on are the ones you can't see in the mirror when you're facing it. Probably 75% of your training should be devoted to things you can't see on the anterior side, because that's what holds posture. That's what maintains skeletal, proficiency. That's what maintains joint health. All of those factors. So a lot of the things you see in the mirror actually ruin postural aging, and you have to make sure you're not advancing that faster. I wouldn't say one top set per exercise. It kind of depends on what you're trying to do, Scott. Hammer strength chest machines. Well, you have to think about this in perspective. And I just posted a thing on my Instagram. Balance is very crucial in your training, especially for normal people. Because if you're not increasing your coordination and your balance while you're training, then what will end up happening is you have what I call show muscle that's good for nothing. So I'm a huge fan of trying to make things more unstable. So therefore, I'm not saying machines are bad. I'm just saying machines should only be a small portion of your training, because where are the stabilizer muscles? So let's say, for example, a chest machine. If we're doing a chest machine, we don't have to stabilize it, right? And don't get me wrong, you can get a hell of a burn on those. But what about the rotator cuff, the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the control of the shoulder blade? All of that on the posterior side is turned off because it's not needed. And then you create a lot of anterior muscle without the balance and coordination in the shoulder, which is a deadly combo. So, not to say that you can't use it, but you need to be careful and make sure that your training has coordination and balance programmed in it on an annual basis. So again, if you guys are on Patreon workouts or on Train Heroic workouts, there's going to be phases of training that actually test and develop your balance more so than just your pure strength. And this is very, very important. And I think it's one of the major reasons why I've been able to stay and maintain such high levels of strength and not have any injuries. Yeah, somebody that can't do one pull-up, I don't have any, especially if he's all muscles and 130 kg. I mean, I got up to 130 kg, and there's a video of me on YouTube doing 27 pull-ups. So I would say only machines. If you're just trying to walk around and look like a bodybuilder, maybe. But for actual real strength and fitness and usable strength in the actual real world, not my first choice. Yeah, waiting for the hammer strength machines at the gym. Yep. Well, I think that was a pretty good live, guys. I appreciate you guys asking the good questions. If you guys can go and like and comment on some of the YouTube videos. There's a new tricep video just got posted yesterday. It's got some really good exercises in it you guys can play around with. We have a couple new manuals on the website. We have the Minimal Equipment Firefighter Tactical Manual, and we have the Equestrian Western Sports Manual. So if you or any daughter or a wife or anybody has, they ride horses or do anything farm related, that is an amazing manual that we've developed with some people that ride horses competitively. We developed it with a competitive jumper and a competitive barrel racer. So those are definitely cool ones to go check out. So hopefully this video gave you some insight on some training modalities and how to kind of navigate everything. And again, this is a lifelong journey. So we only got 9 likes right now. So if you guys can all hit the like button before I close out, that would be awesome. So, all right, guys, I'll talk to you later. It's about time for me to start working with the fire guys. So, see you later.